might have come late, go to feedback.de, type in the session KZZM, that's the correct one now, and log in and join the rating system. So that's how the website looks like, and yeah, so in this round we have another 4 speakers, and we do have a girl speaker, so yay! And, yeah. But this round, we have a guy opening this round. So Nate will talk about new perspectives on psychiatric treatments. I'm sorry, I'm still nervous. He has a background in psychology. He's also a PhD candidate at the MUC in my lab. So yeah, I didn't force him to speak, right? So he's from Slovenia, and he's a whiskey expert and a mouse whisperer. You can ask him about that after the science slam. And so it's your turn, Nate. You can already come up on stage, and we're gonna draw the book. All right, and you might be curious about who gives the next improv talk. Ooh, actually, Lothar. Here you are. Amazing that you put in your name. So
yeah, it was an accident.
That was your name, so you'll be the next improv talk person. So,
Sure.
all right. Okay. So, have fun.
Okay. Hey, I'm Nate, and I'll talk about a new perspective on psychiatric disorders. But before I start my talk, I just want to do like a super quick experiment with you guys. So like, please participate. Maybe just put your beer down just for a second. It's going to be super quick. Okay. So what I would like you to do is do something that's going to sound a bit stupid, okay? But just take your index finger, okay? Can you show it? Okay. Let's take your index fingers. And when I tell you, please put it between your teeth like this. Okay? Just for a few seconds. Does everybody get it? Just take your index finger and put it between teeth. And I'll say like 3, 2, 1. Let's do it. And just hold it in there until like I say so. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Let's do it. Okay, great. Well done. Good participation. So I'll tell you why you have to do this, or why this is good for you, towards the end of the talk. Okay, back to this new perspective on psychiatric treatment. So psychiatric disorders are an extremely big problem in our society. So basically 100% of people either have a psychiatric disorder or intimately know somebody who has it. So maybe you have it or just the person next to you. Yeah, I know. So, obviously, because of this, there's been quite a lot of attention going towards this, right? Like, pharmaceutical companies are investing a lot of money in it. Research institutions are investing a lot of time in understanding them. But what are really psychiatric disorders? And especially, what are disorders of emotion, which I want to discuss a bit more today? So they're basically mental problems in which the emotional functioning is somehow impaired. So that means maybe you're feeling wrong emotions at the wrong times. Maybe you're feeling emotions way too strongly, so when nothing really dangerous is happening, you feel extreme fear, or maybe you just don't feel any emotions. And of course, that's a problem. So, as I said, people are putting a lot of attention into this, and a bodily organ that has been identified with, the power of modern medicine and neuroscience to be a pretty good target for trying to understand emotions or disorders and to treat these problems has been the brain, okay? But the brain has some problems in this aspect, so it's kind of badly understood. Why is it badly understood? Well, it's extremely complicated. It consists of a lot of different cells that are very small. Duncan already said in the first talk, there's 100 billions of cells in a human brain, a lot of them very different from each other. Second problem is that the brain is very hard to access. So the brain is separated from the bloodstream by a blood-brain barrier, which is basically a barrier that prevents any weird chemicals from crossing into the brain, which is good in our normal functioning, but is not good when these chemicals are basically drugs that we want to get into the brain. So how can we approach the brain better or in a different way? So for now, what we're doing is we're basically creating drugs in a lab that we think might work, and even if you can get them to be delivered to the brain, often they actually have no effect or they have the opposite effects of what we expect. So there's been some recent scandals, for example, regarding drugs for depression, which have been used by hundreds of millions of people in recent decades. And they have recently been shown to not be more effective than placebo, while at the same time having extremely negative side effects. So basically, could we find a new approach to dealing with this massive problem, with these disorders, without basically flooding the brain with some random chemicals with unpredictable consequences that in the end might not even work? Well, I think that we might. And the way we can approach this is by going back to the beginnings of psychology. And we can basically look into how pioneers of psychology of emotion have dealt with understanding what emotions actually are. So, in those times, basically two clubs formed in understanding how emotions function, which still exist today. The first club basically said, let's say you hear a funny joke. So the first club said, okay, so the most evolutionarily new part of our brain is called the cortex. So this is kind of this thinking part of our brain. So when we hear a funny joke, our cortex basically very accurately parses the content of this joke, identifies the funny twist, and basically gives an order to the muscles of our face saying, this is really funny, you better laugh because I want to show this to people. But the other club basically said, no, that's so stupid. Even though it makes a lot of sense, right? What they say is something that is extremely non-intuitive, but I think it has quite a lot of evidence to be true, at least partially. What they say is that when you hear a funny joke, it's not our cortex or a thinking brain that actually understands that the joke was funny. It's actually our deeper, way evolutionarily older parts of the brain that understand the funniness of the joke, basically, or the emotion behind it. And we immediately start laughing in response. And what our cortex actually does is our cortex knows that we just heard or read a joke and knows that we're laughing and says, well, I'm laughing, I mean, I guess I'm happy and I guess the joke was funny. So it's just interpreting the emotion that we're actually feeling without its involvement. So there's a considerable amount of evidence that this is actually a pretty good theory. So you remember the thing with the finger that we did just before? So this is one of the classical experiments that have been done to kind of investigate this theory. So what these people have proposed is that if we can just activate without doing anything to the brain, if we can just put the body in a position of an emotion, let's say we put a finger in our mouth. You can think and you can see that a lot of muscles that have activated are actually the muscles that activate when you're smiling. The same if you put a finger just above our mouth, like this. We basically make a frown. Yeah, it's a bit of a stupid face. We basically activate a lot of muscles that are associated with negative emotions. And what this actually does, which is to me quite fascinating, is without any real stimulus being present, it actually puts us in a sort of an emotional state. So people will actually feel this emotion, although faintly, for some minutes after they do this movement. And what's very interesting to me is that there's actually another piece of evidence for this. So people who are users of Botox, which basically inhibits your facial muscles, these people basically have quite severely impaired emotional functioning overall. So basically, these people, when they receive emotional stimuli, they just think they're nothing. They actually really subjectively, they don't find them funny or sad or anything except if they're extremely strong. So what I'm proposing is that we can basically use this trick of the body seemingly being an important part of this cycle of feeling an emotion to basically break it. And actually, this has been very successfully used in recent years. So people with phobias, like for example, there's a phobia of public speaking. So these people will sweat, they will heart will go crazy, they'll breathe like crazy when they have to give a public talk. But there's actually, it's not so bad, right? Well, how this was being solved in the old times, so like decades ago, is they would basically be given sedatives. So they would have problems moving, they would have problems speaking, they would basically be on sedatives. You can imagine how it looks like. But a modern solution, based on the theory I just gave you, is to basically give them a drug that doesn't touch their brain at all. This drug only prevents the action of adrenaline, which is basically a hormone released when you're in a stress situation, and it basically prevents their heartbeat and their breathing rate from increasing. And it's kind of fascinating that just giving them this drug that doesn't do anything to their brains at all, you cannot even enter it, basically makes them calm and they can give great talks, and it also solves other phobias. So basically what I want you to take away from this talk is that the body is way more important for our emotional functioning than you might think, that there might be a better approach to basically solving psychiatric disorders that by flooding our brains with weird chemicals that we don't understand. And the last thing, you know, when you're sad, just use your finger.
Alright, so I think we learned something from this talk with the finger, so yeah, I guess remember that. Yeah, so you know what's coming. Take out your phones for the first time in this round and give Nate your votes about how consistent this talk was, how novel it was, how many new things did you learn, how persuasive was he, do you believe his theory, how engaging was he. So you have time to vote, to cast this vote now, please. Go ahead. So take your time to do a good vote, to be fair. So what? Yeah. Okay. So I hope you all voted. Yeah. Get a thumbs up from Nick. All right. So that brings us to Lothar part number 1. We'll see him later on stage as well. So. Yeah, okay, so now you're telling us what was the talk about, what new things did you learn, and what did you really love about the talk. So
I started backwards then. What I really loved about the talk is there was just one slide, a whole lot of words, but it was really engaging. So I don't know where you are already. It's a great talk. The talk was about psychiatric diseases, and I guess he started with kind of a criticism of how these diseases have been treated mainstream-like, with a lot of drugs, chemicals that might not even do the right thing in the brain, because the brain is very complicated, no one even knows what's going on there, and there's also like this brain-blood barrier, so it's hard to access. And what he then offered is a kind of alternative approach. We will be going back to what causes these, and I should mention this was psychiatric diseases, mainly emotions. What causes these problems with emotions, and what he put forward was this theory that actually the brain is like kind of low level, the emotions, right? You get the emotions first, and then your brain makes sense of what these emotions are. And so what he's saying is one should really work on this low level part of the body that gives you these emotions before you even know them, because that's kind of maybe what's missing, right? Not your brain is the problem, but or not the high function of the brain, but the lower level that creates these emotions in the first place. And he gave us a really nice example with the finger. He didn't give us the finger, he just gave us the example. So it was a great talk. It was, I learned a lot. Really enjoyed it.
alright. Good job. So you can also again take your phones and rate the improv talk that Lothar did on Nate's talk. So tell me, how consistent was it? How novel was it? How persuasive did he present Nate's work? And how engaging was he actually? So you have a chance to vote for Lothar the first time now. We'll have a chance later again. So, okay, all right. So that was round 1 and round 2, first talk. So now finally, we come to the second talk of this round, which is from Lizzie Huber, and her talk is called The Schlafen Proteins from Structure to Function. And her background is in biology and biochemistry, and she just finished her PhD at the MUC Gene Center, so she's, no, we have some postdocs, but yeah, so congrats to that. And yeah, so she actually sings in a choir, she runs half marathons, and she takes part in Schachkopf tournaments. So there was a lot of things I had to put in your fun fact list, because you do actually many things besides your PhD, so I'm impressed. Okay, so come on, take But before you start, we have, of course, again the vote or the person. Oh, it looks like a girl. Joanna Sabina Rautku? Joanna? Joanna?
She's at the third.
She's at the Oh, I'm sorry. Can you tell her that it is her? Oh, we have to wait for her. Okay, that's I don't want to get rid of. I'm happy that's a girl. Okay, well, let's keep her It's you two. Oh, amazing. You're gonna push the female quote. Thank you. Okay, so it's your turn. Good. Well, thank you and have fun.
Hello everybody, I'm Lizzie and I'm super glad to present here to show you that also there are female scientists and also girls can get a PhD. So I work with the Schlafen proteins. This is a hardcore biochemistry talk, but I try to make it as good as understandable as possible. So those of you who do not speak German, Schlafen means to sleep. And that's why I often
I add this to your clock. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Should work now.
And that's why I often get asked if I work in a sleeping laboratory or if I slept throughout my PhD. Okay. Sometimes I took a nap. This is not true. And Schlafen is a pretty awesome protein family. Everybody has the Schlafen proteins in the body. Everybody produces them. You, my PI, everybody. So they baptize Schlafen because they have been shown that they can inhibit the cell cycles and kind of put the cells to sleep. There are some more pretty cool roles they play. For example, they play a role in T-cell development. T-cells are cells of our immune system and they protect you against bacteria and pathogens. Then Schlafen play a role in cancer. So then cancer is, when a person has cancer, the tumor cells spread uncontrollably, like the gray cells here. Schlafen can prevent the spread of the tumor cells. And they also can inhibit the replication of the virus HIV. And in an experiment with cells, it's shown that HIV is not spreading anymore when there's a certain Schlafen protein present. Doesn't this sound cool? Schlafen against HIV and cancer? This would be like, we would have a lot of that problem. But it's not the case yet. So when I started my PhD, there was not known how the Schlafen proteins look like how they're structured, what's the structure of the Schlafen proteins, and what is the biochemistry behind those proteins, what is the molecular working mechanism. And this is what my colleagues and me asked ourselves, how do they look like, how do they work? And because the Schlafen proteins are very, very small and tiny, you cannot just use a magnifier, but I used a technique called X-ray crystallography. And for this, we first use bacteria cells to manipulate them, and they produce our Schlafen proteins. Once we have isolated the Schlafen proteins, we make crystals out of them, we shoot them with X-rays, and we get this so-called diffraction pattern, which is a 2D image. And with the help of a computer, we could, from this 2D diffraction pattern, calculate the three-dimensional electron density. And now you have to imagine this kind of like a puzzle, that we fit the atoms of the Schlafen proteins into this electron density, and we end up with a protein model. My dad always says it looks like Hahnemann paper streamers when I'm producing them, but actually it really makes sense how the different structures are arranged in the protein, and it's very important for its function. There are a lot of proteins already known, they're published, you can also have a look at them in the internet, but there's no protein so far that has the same fault as the Schlafen proteins, and I'm very proud and I think it's pretty cool that we have discovered a novel and a unique fault. Just to give you a dimension how big the protein is, so it's like 4 nanometers in height and 6 nanometers in length, and it's more or less the same ratio to a tennis ball than a basketball to the Atlantic Ocean. So they're pretty small. So we have to structure now. What's the function? What do they do? So we had a look at the surface of the protein, and we saw that there are a lot of positively charged regions on the protein. And then we thought, when it's so positively charged, maybe it binds DNA that is negatively charged. And this is the case. It binds to DNA, and it also binds to RNA, which is kind of a chemical cousin of the DNA. With the help of biochemistry, we could identify two amino amino acids in the protein that are important for the DNA binding. And we also have first evidences that it does not only bind DNA, but also degrade nucleic acids. And right now I'm in the process of identifying the amino acids, the regions that are important for the degradation of nucleic acids. And with that, I hope I could convince you that Schlaf is a pretty cool protein family. In my thesis, I provided the first molecular basis of the Schlafen characterization. But until we have a Schlafen medication, there will be a lot of more research to be done, and so far we can only dream about those. So thank you for your
Awesome. Well, so thank you for the really cool talk. I'm not feeling tired now, so thank you. Even though it's about Schlafen. So yeah, grab your phones and rate Lizzie's talk. How did you like it? How consistent was she? How many new things did you learn? Did she convince you also about the talk? And how engaging was she telling you about the Schlafen proteins and how cool they actually are and the folds that she found in these proteins? Okay, you can give your votes now and hope you're done, because now it's time for another two girls to come on stage. You're there already. Awesome. Thank you. Give them a hand. Yes. Yeah, cool. Amazing. So just come here and combine forces. Tell us what the talk was about, what new things you learned, and what you loved about the talk. So.
Thank you for your talk, Lizzie. So what did we learn? We learned that RPI also is schlafening, and that also she sometimes incognito is schlafing at the microscope. But what we also learned is that schlafen are an interesting protein family which are involved in many pathways, and if we use them right, we might use them also for HIV and cancer therapy. But so far we didn't know so much about it, and so Lizzie had a project where she tried to characterize these Schlafen proteins and did a structure from them. And then she saw that on the surface she has different ions, and that these can somehow come together with DNA and also degrade it. And now she's trying to find out where exactly these amino acids are which are degrading the DNA. And with this basis, she wants to find good therapies.
What did you love about the talk?
I learned a lot of new things. Actually, I didn't know that you could X-ray proteins to get like the shadow and to find out the structure of the proteins, just like with the bones. And then there's a good thing behind schlapping with the HIV and cancer. I didn't know that it was actually for a good thing. And I loved how she played with Pac-Man as well when she said degrading about the DNA, because I noticed that from the title. And yeah.
Amazing. So now you can rate again on the improv talkers from Lizzie's talk. So give a vote for Hannah and Maike and how well they represented what Lizzie has just told us. So cast your votes on consistency, novelty, persuasiveness, and engagement, please, for the improv talks. And what they understood about the Schlafen proteins. So, yeah, all right. Okay, cool. So, coming closer to the end, and now we actually have Lothar again on stage with this very nice photo. And yeah, so his background is in physics. We are going to hear a physics talk now. And he's a PhD candidate at the MPI Quantum Optics and the Laser Spectroscopy Division. And I was really curious about your fun fact. You said probably 50% baby carrots by mass. So you have to explain that.
Yeah,
No,
that is.
okay. And so is Joanna back? Is that you? We drew your name before. Do you already know?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Because I want to keep the female ratio. So it's your turn, and for the improv talk, and it's your turn to show what you can improvise on.
All right.
Have fun.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it feels good to be back. My name is Lothar, I'm a physicist, and I'm going to talk about the day in the life of an electron. Alright, let's get right to it. This is obviously an electron, the blue thing there. And it's a free electron, it's kind of single, in vacuum, and has a negative charge. Alright, now a proton comes along. The proton is also free, single, has a positive charge, so there's some obvious attraction going on here. The second love story of the night after the lysosome and the... And I'm also going to skip over the steamy parts of this relationship, but stuff happens, and at the end of it, the electron ejects a photon that takes away some of the energy, and now the two of them are in a bound state. And the bound state is nothing else but an atom. So now we have an electron and a proton, they're bound together, and it's actually a hydrogen atom. There's also other atoms, more electrons, but those are for chemists. And so I'm only going to talk about hydrogen atoms. But still though, what I'm going to hopefully convince you at the end of the talk is that even though it looks very simple, it's not. Okay? So what's happening, let's say the first effect, sometimes, you know, the electron's going, and then it just, you know, emits a virtual photon and then reabsorbs. It talks to itself, kind of. And it's a virtual photon because it doesn't really exist, only for a very short time, and you cannot really detect it. And I probably should have mentioned that photon is what light's made of. Okay? Okay, how does a physicist look at this? They look at this so-called Feynman diagram. Obviously, the blue line is an electron, and obviously the green line is a photon. And what's going on here is that the electron, as it moves down in time, emits this virtual photon, and then it absorbs it again. Okay? So I'm an experimentalist. I don't know what the hell this means. So I'm just, you know, break it down for myself and also hopefully for you. The way I like to think about this is, you know, we have like a sad electron, it goes to bed at night. Next morning, it wakes up and it's kind of less sad. How did it achieve that? Well, you know, this is a smart electron, right? So what it did is it wrote itself a motivational note, you know, like, be negative, right? You know, you're attractive, right? So really, this effect should not be called electron self-energy, but electron self-worth. It's a positive message I'm giving you. And, you know, actually this effect increases the binding energy between the electron and the proton. So there's so many relations of metaphors in this, right? But I'm not going to talk about that. So that's self-energy. There's also another effect, so-called vacuum polarization. Vacuum is this white stuff around it. Turns out the vacuum is not empty. Sometimes, out of nowhere, a pair of particle and antiparticle disappears again, and again, emits a virtual photon and talks to the electron. So the electron somehow feels that it's not alone, right? There's something else going on. It's really a lot of metaphors, right? Right. So this is kind of like the vacuum is a sea of particle. It's not empty, as you would maybe think. Okay, let's again look at this as from a physicist's point of view. Again, this kind of Feynman diagram. Electron is moving along. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, this particle-antiparticle pair appears very briefly, disappears again, but it leaves a trace. This photon, which talks to the electron. So the electron feels there's something going on, and then a slightly less bound electron is left over. Again, what the hell does this mean? When we think about this, electron is just minding its business, you know, just kind of doesn't want to be bothered. And I'm going to move over there now because you guys are neglected all the time. And unexpected stuff happens, and then it stays slightly less okay. I don't know how many of you take the subway, but I feel like pretty good analogy is like you're taking the subway and you're super crowded, and then suddenly there's a penguin playing drums. It happens to me all the time, right? And this is the electron. He's not having any of it. I mean, yeah. So this decreases the attraction of the proton electron because, you know, just kind of strain on the relationship. All right. I feel like now you guys are experts on atoms. So I'm just going to quickly recap it for you. So this is how the atom looks like if you don't consider all this stuff, like you know, 100 years ago, whatever. You know, then some smart guy comes along and says, actually, the electron is relativistic, it's moving really fast, which is clearly seen here by, you know, it's kind of smeared out. I did those myself, by the way. Also, the proton is also moving, it's more and more complicated. Also, the proton is actually relativistic, so it's also moving really quickly, clearly visualized here. And the rest of the stuff you already know, right? So there's the self-energy, there's the vacuum polarization, there's 2-photon corrections, 3-photon corrections, radiative recoil corrections, which you already know, nuclear self-energy, polarizability, and of course nuclear size. And for those of you who are a bit slower, I'm just going to have it go through once more, so you can familiarize yourself with the equations. Okay. So now hopefully I've convinced you it's a mess, right? But that's our best guess of what's going on. That's our best guess of how the atom actually, what describes the atom, okay? And this mess has a name, it's called quantum electrodynamics. And actually it's a super successful theory. How do we know that? It's because we test it, okay? We test if this is true. And that's where I come in, so that's me. In the lab. And I'm working on my laser there, and my laser is a source of photons. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to shoot a photon onto this atom, okay, it's a real photon, okay, and I'm going to make this photon have just right enough energy to just break these two guys up, okay, just right amount of energy. So what happens is the photon interacts with the electron, and the proton is gone again.
Let us talk on the 4 categories. How much did you learn about electron relationships in this talk? Tell me. How consistent was it? Could you understand what you were saying? Are you convinced now that this is actually a mess, the whole electron dynamics, physics, mess thingy, right? So, okay. Thanks that you gave the vote. And now, again, Joanna, come on stage, please. Give her a hand. So tell us what you learned and what talk was about and what you left about.
Okay, so I was very unlucky because I'm a biologist and I got the physics talk, so I'll try to summarize in a coherent way, but I don't know if I'll do good. So basically we learned about the hydrogen element, and that a hydrogen atom is made up of proton and electron, yeah. And these two bind together, but apparently it's not that simple because there are many things that influence this binding, and yes, stuff like the self-worth of the electron and yeah, other things too. And basically, so it's complicated. And what you do in your lab is you test the strength of the relationship by injecting laser stuff. Yeah, and so I loved the graphics and everything. It was really fast forward, but cool. And the comic sans fun.
Awesome. So also biologists understand physics, which is, I'm also a biologist, but character understood what you said. So, now it's rating time for the improv talk about Luca's talk that Joanna gave. So, get your phones, do the rating, you know how it works. In the meantime, it can be very fast, I'm very sure. And rate how you like what she presented. Okay, so I get two thumbs from Nick. And that brings us to the very last talk of today, unfortunately already the last one. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So this talk is from Tom. Come on stage. You can already. So Tom is also, maybe some of you remember him. He was at the last slam.
Long time no see.
Hello
everyone.
Okay. And his background is also in physics, so we have another physics. Is it that's what you wrote? Is it not?
I don't remember this.
What is
This
your...
is embarrassing. I mean, it is kind of accurate, but also, yeah.
Okay, well, I just continue.